Welcome back to the deep dive. This time we're going to do something a little different. We're diving into some presidential history.
But not the typical boring textbook stuff.
Yeah, exactly. We're going for the surprising, the quirky and fascinating facts about all those who have been in the Oval Office.
Think of it as like a behind-the-scenes peek at the human side of these guys.
Yeah. And what makes this deep dive even more fun is our source material is from, well, have you ever seen that show, Little Big Shots?
Oh, yeah?
The one with Steve Harvey?
Right.
Yeah, so there's this clip with this young kid, like he was a whiz kid, but like for presidential history, and he knows his stuff, let me tell you.
He does.
And that's kind of our jumping off point for this. We're not just going to regurgitate names and dates, you
Right.
know? We're going deeper into those lesser known things, the kind of stuff that makes you go, wait, really?
Exactly. It's those little details that really make these guys come to life. And believe it or not, you can actually learn a lot about them. Like their personalities, even the times they lived in, just by looking at those quirky facts.
Oh, absolutely.
For example, take Grover Cleveland. He's the only president who served 2 terms. But they weren't back-to-back.
What?
Yeah.
Hold on. How is that even possible? It's not like he lost and then just kind of popped back in a few years later, right?
No, not exactly. See, his terms, he was the 22nd and 24th president, and in between those 2 terms was Benjamin Harrison's presidency.
Wow.
And I think it really speaks to, how crazy the political landscape was back then, like in the late 19th century. It's pretty remarkable that Cleveland had such a hold on the public, enough to win twice, and not even consecutively.
I'd love to dive more into that sometime.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, so speaking of fascinating presidents, let's move on to a more recent one. Barack Obama. Did you know he won a Grammy?
He did.
A Grammy, like the music award.
Yeah. For Best Spoken Word Album back in 2008, for the audiobook of his book, Dreams from My Father.
Interesting. I never knew that.
Yeah, and you know what's funny is he's not the only president to win a Grammy. Bill Clinton and Jimmy Carter both won Grammys, too.
Oh, wow. For spoken word also.
Yep.
I wonder what that says about, I don't know. It makes you think, is it just that they're all really good communicators? Or does it maybe say something about how politics and pop culture are kind of mixing these days?
That's a really interesting question, and it actually makes me think about Ronald Reagan and his time in Hollywood before he got into politics.
Oh, that's true. It does make you wonder if that background shaped his presidency at all. But I think we're getting ahead of ourselves here. Let's get back to those fun presidential facts. And this one's pretty funny. Okay, so we all know Ulysses S. Grant, brilliant military strategist, but did you know that he got a speeding ticket while riding his horse?
Yeah, that's a true story.
Really?
Yep. It supposedly happened in D.C. Grant was really known for loving a good fast ride, but apparently being president doesn't get you out of traffic violations.
I guess some things never change. Doesn't matter who you are. I wonder what the officer's reaction was. Can you imagine pulling over the president on his horse?
Yeah, I can only imagine.
It's just a funny image.
Hmm.
Okay, so speaking of presidential quirks, this next story might just take the cake. It involves William Howard Taft and, the White House bathtub.
Oh, yeah, the story about Taft getting stuck in the bathtub.
Mm,
It's pretty funny, but it also makes you think about, well, I guess, about changing social norms.
right, like especially about body image and stuff. It's funny because we hear about Taft's weight, and the story always seems to play into that whole image of him being a large man. But it really does make you think what was considered large back then might be totally average today.
That's so true.
It's funny how even something as simple as a bathtub can reflect those kind of changes in society.
Yeah, definitely. And just imagine if they were building the White House today, those tubs would be way bigger.
You're probably right. And who knows, maybe that whole incident never would have happened. Okay, so let's move on from bathroom humor, shall we? Let's talk about a president who's well known for being eloquent. Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence. But according to our little presidential expert friend, he wasn't actually a very good public speaker.
Isn't that wild?
It is.
You have the guy who literally wrote the book on American democracy, but then he struggled with actually speaking in public.
Oh, yeah, it really makes you think about all the different forms of communication. Like Jefferson was clearly amazing with the written word,
Absolutely.
but maybe something about public speaking, like the immediacy of it, or the pressure. Maybe that presented a whole other challenge for him.
Makes sense to me.
Okay, so speaking of words, this next presidential fact really threw me for a loop. John Quincy Adams, son of John Adams, and he became president himself later. Well, he didn't actually grow up speaking English as his first language.
You're right. It was French.
Oh.
Yeah. It's because of how he was raised and his early life being in Europe. His dad was a diplomat, in
Yeah.
France. So John Quincy was exposed to the language and the culture from when he was really little.
That's fascinating. It's just a reminder that the American story is really intertwined with all these global influences. You have a future president whose most formative years were shaped by another culture, another language even. I think it adds this whole other layer to his story. And maybe to how we think about American identity, too.
It really is a great example of how those little facts, those quirky facts, can actually teach us a lot about history and culture.
Yeah.
It's not just about knowing that John Quincy Adams could speak French.
Right.
It's about understanding how that fact fits into his whole life and the world back then.
You're right. You're right. And that's why I love these deep dives so much.
If you do.
It's like putting a puzzle together, and each little detail adds something new to the bigger picture.
Exactly. And sometimes those little details are the ones that really spark the imagination, the ones that really make history come alive.
I'm ready for the next one. What else you got?
All right, let's see. Let's talk about a president who you might not expect to be an artist. Rutherford B. Hayes.
Rutherford B. Hayes, the artist. Now, that's not something you hear every day.
Nope, not really.
Yeah.
But he was pretty good. He liked to do watercolor landscapes and still lifes mostly.
Interesting.
Yeah. He said it was relaxing, a good way to escape the pressures of being president.
I can see that. I mean, having a creative outlet, especially when you're dealing with the stress of leading a country,
Right.
it makes me wonder if any other presidents had, like, secret artistic talents. Maybe someday we'll find a secret stash of presidential sculptures or poems or something.
Oh, man. That'd be amazing. It's just a good reminder that these presidents, they weren't just politicians.
Right.
They were real people with hobbies and interests just like us.
Exactly. Speaking of hidden talents, though, let's talk about Calvin Coolidge. Silent Cal.
Oh, yeah.
He was a man of few words. That's what everyone always says.
That's the reputation he had.
Yeah, so what could he possibly have done that would surprise us?
Well, this might surprise you, but he was actually a big fan of vaudeville.
Really?
Yeah, he loved it. And get this, he even did a little comedy himself every now and then.
Wait, hold on. Coolidge, the comedian.
Yeah.
I gotta hear more about this. What kind of jokes did he tell? Was he actually funny?
Well, they say his humor was pretty dry,
Okay.
and he kind of played off his reputation for being quiet.
I bet.
Apparently, he could deliver a one-liner with a completely straight face,
Oh, man, I bet that was hilarious.
and the audience loved it.
It just goes to show you can't judge a book by its cover or a president by his public image.
Exactly. There's always more than meets the eye.
I know. Makes you wonder if other presidents had some secret comedic talent. Like, can you imagine Abraham Lincoln doing stand-up?
Now that I would pay to see,
Right.
it's cool to think about how they used humor, publicly or privately, as a way to connect with people, or maybe even to deal with all the stress of the job.
I think so, too. It makes them seem more human. Yeah.
It reminds you that they weren't just these, untouchable figures in a history book,
Right.
but real people with a sense of humor, just like us.
Exactly. And that's what's so great about history. It's not just about dates and battles and all that. It's about the people who lived through it all.
Yeah, their personalities,
Yeah.
their quirks, and yeah, even their jokes.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm ready for another surprise. Who's next?
Okay. Let's talk about a president who's famous for being tough and determined. Andrew Jackson. Did you know that he was in multiple duels?
Andrew Jackson, the dueling president. Well, I guess that's not totally surprising knowing his reputation. He was a tough guy.
He was.
But I am curious about these duels. What were they about? Who was he dueling with?
Well, the most famous one was with a guy named Charles Dickinson.
Okay.
Dickinson had insulted Jackson's wife.
Oh.
And Jackson was actually seriously injured in that duel.
Wow.
But he survived. Sounds like something out of a movie. It really makes you think about how different things were back then. Like, honor and reputation were so important. They were willing to fight duels over it. Hard to imagine a president today doing that.
I know. It was a different time for sure. Honor and social norms were just totally different. But it's also a reminder that even presidents are shaped by the times they lived in.
That's true. It makes you realize that how we see history is affected by our own perspective, like
Yeah.
what we think is right or wrong today.
That's exactly right. And that's why it's so important to approach history with an open mind. We got to try to understand these guys within the context of their time, even if what they did seems strange to us now.
It's all about understanding.
Yeah.
Recognizing that history is complex and full of contradictions, and that's what makes it so fascinating.
I agree.
So what other surprises do you have about these presidents? I'm ready for more.
Well, how about this? Let's talk about a president who was a big outdoorsman, Theodore Roosevelt. You know, he was actually a pretty serious bird watcher.
Teddy Roosevelt, the bird watcher. I mean, I can see him being out in nature, exploring and all that, but bird watching, that just seems a little more, I don't know, peaceful than how I usually picture him.
Yeah, well, it might surprise you, but Roosevelt was a huge nature lover.
Mm-hmm.
He actually kept these really detailed bird lists and even wrote about what he saw.
It's interesting to think about what he would thought about today's world, with everyone on their phones and computers all the time.
Yeah.
So disconnected from nature. I wonder if he'd be like a big environmentalist today.
Probably,
Yeah.
given how much he loved nature. It's kind of fun to imagine how those guys from the past would react to the stuff going on today.
Yeah, it is. Speaking of presidents who might have something to say about the modern world, how about Herbert Hoover?
Hoover.
Yeah.
The Great Depression president.
Yeah. What could he possibly have done that would surprise us?
Well, get this. Hoover was an orphan, and he actually became a millionaire all on his own before he got into politics.
Wait, really? From orphan to millionaire to president, that's quite the story.
It is. I think it says a lot about how resilient he was
Yeah.
and how ambitious.
Definitely. It also kind of breaks that stereotype of the politician who was born with a silver spoon. Shows you that there's no one path to becoming president.
Very true. It just goes to show that behind every president, there's this whole personal story.
Yeah.
You know, all these experiences that shaped how they saw the world and how they led.
You're right. And that's why I think learning about the presidents is so interesting. It's not just about the politics and the big events.
Right.
It's about getting to know the people, their motivations, what made them tick, the good and the bad.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that they were human just like us.
Right.
They had struggles. They had to make tough choices. And at the end of the day, they all left their mark on history.
Well said. I think those are some pretty good takeaways from our little presidential deep dive.
I think so, too.
It was fun learning all this stuff with you, all those surprises and laughs.
Me too. It's always fun exploring those little hidden corners of history.
And to all our listeners out there, we hope this deep dive sparked something in you, made you a little more curious about the presidents. Remember, there's always something new to learn, new connections to make, and more stories out there just waiting to be discovered.
So keep asking questions, keep digging deeper, and most importantly, keep learning.
That's right. You never know what you might find. And on that note, we've reached the end of our presidential journey. Until next time, happy exploring.